Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome to The Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am Captain Frodo, and I will be your host and your guide along the way. Gracious as host and gracious as guide, I hope. Today's episode, we are talking to Jay Gilligan, and for the perceptive and intelligent listener, such as yourself, who has been paying attention along the way of these transmissions out into the carnival ether, you will know that we have an ongoing series. We're up to, I believe it's episode 15. So the last episode where we talked about this, the fact that what we do as performers is actually a kind of play. And I don't take these ideas lightly. As you know by now, I go into it at great length. And the last episode, 119, we explored how love is the actual wellspring of play. And parents are the soil from where play as a phenomena in the world of the human beings actually came from. And it's not just in human beings, going all the way back to the birth of mammals, if not parallel in other realms of the animal kingdom as well. But be that as it may, to expand upon and to understand deeper, I have had the great fortune of having Jay Gilligan, my good friend, and also my anchor to reality. Because if I am thinking about these things and I feel a little bit dislodged from reality, I'm doing my gigs and I'm doing all this, and then thinking about the deeper aspects of it, when I then talk to Jay, either in person, or we have these long sessions that go on where I'm sending him messages on WhatsApp, recorded messages, sometimes 10, 15, 20 minutes long, where I talk and then he reply and then I talk. So there's these long form, dislodged in a way, but somehow you can go deeper because you can listen to the conversation that he's had, and then I can formulate my answer a little bit more and then reply. So it's an interesting form of conversation, something which I have wondered whether I could take some of those and actually turn them into an episode so that you could hear what it actually sounds like, as the ideas are sort of being developed in, if not in real time, then developed in the special time that emerges through this particular type of conversation, which we have in between the cracks, as we call it. And we made reflex in between the cracks. It's like in the time that you have when you don't have to do stuff for your family, you don't have to do stuff related to taxes or all the stuff that you have to do in your life, but you're doing just the stuff that's just for you, for developing yourself as a human being and as an artist. That's the sort of, we find reality cracks. And the biggest reality crack of all for us performers, that was the pandemic. And I guess it's during this time that we did our biggest project, and we got to know each other really well. And I am now recording this in a hotel in a small town in the heart of the Fjordland, where I have been doing a gig yesterday, and I'm doing one more gig today. The company is big, and they've rented out a local cinema where I've set up my stuff, and it's standing there on the stage now, and I will go back in later on. And I decided to use this time in between the cracks, because this is part of my process. When I'm on the road, I'd really try to focus on making the time away from my family really count. So that's why I'm sitting here now in my hotel room. The hotel fridge just came on. You might be able to hear that on the recording. It's not a perfect recording, but this episode was a perfect pleasure for me to have the chat with Jay Gilligan. So we are, just pivoted back again to explain that, it's like we are talking using the episodes about play as the starting point. We start talking about episode 107, and he asks me questions, but the conversation is really far-ranging and goes really deep. And I'm really, really glad that I can share this with you, and I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, I was listening to episode 107.
Sweet.
And had some notes that I took from the things that you said. And a couple of these things are huge, huge issues in my artistic life. So I'm pretty excited to get the chance to ask you to dive deeper in a couple of these things. And I just want to give a general, I don't say overview, or disclaimer, but general reflection, which is that on a lot of the episodes you're in right now, I think what you're saying is very straightforward because you're just listing, not just, but you're uncovering and listing like the qualities of play, and you're going through them very succinctly and like in an order, and it's very clear. So it's not so interpretive right now, I'd say. Yeah. But definitely, of course, along the way of this journey, you're bringing up a bunch of points that are not necessarily like an irrelevant tangent, but are a little bit parallel to what you're talking about in the episode. So I don't think a lot of the episodes I have right now that I've been listening to, I'm not so much lost in terms of like, well, wait, what did Frodo mean by that? Or what is Frodo's thinking on this idea, which kind of occurred to me when I started listening to the whole season. But now it's more like, I just want to hear you like expand your opinion on a couple of these topics, because I find them really major concepts and ideas in my life right now. And I'm just really eager to hear, like, are these things, how they fit into your life in your own words. So if it's okay, I'll just jump into the first quote I pulled from the episode. Are you good
Absolutely.
to go? Okay.
Yeah. This is like episode 107, and then it becomes 109 because we got the chat with Jelly Boy as 108. These episodes are called Unpacking Play, part 1 and 2. So it's totally true what you said. It's literally talking about what play is, which I have divided into these 5 criteria, so 5 aspects of play that pretty much covers any kind of play for humans, speaking from a human point of view or whatever. So you're totally right. At this point, that is what we're doing. We're fleshing out our understanding of what play is. It's been building for a while, and now we're grappling with that. So I can totally see that maybe the philosophical things that was coming out in the beginning, where I was talking about the imaginal world and all this sort of other more abstract and crazy stuff. Now it's getting a little bit more straightforward. So yeah, totally fire away at the and it's interesting that you mentioned my opinion, that you want to hear my opinion about it. And I've had that pointed out to me before as well, that during this season and I have a tendency to bring in the work of other people, most of the time from people outside of actual performance, into this world. And that is, of course, what I am doing here, because the fundamental belief that showmanship is play, that's my idea. But what I'm doing in this whole season is to show that this is not a trivial thought that I just thought, oh yeah, it is. So now I'm spending 30 episodes explaining why it is. And to do so, I go, it's my idea, and it's really simple. I believe that showmanship is a form of play. And by fully understanding that and understanding what play is, which is what we're doing in these episodes, we can learn a whole lot about what it actually is and means to perform, and what the act is, and what showmanship is, and everything. So yeah, it is a lot of other people's opinions. So it's really great that you pick up on what I think, and we keep talking about this, what's the everyday practical aspect of it, and what are the ideas, because sometimes they are very different. I am so abstract and highfalutin when I'm talking about these things, but when you and me talk offline about the next production we're making, or next show or whatever, or the next act, we are talking about, oh yeah, and then I carry this chair like this.
Yeah.
And it's literally like those things. So that's the reality of this. So yeah, anyway. Thanks.
All right. This first quote, it's quite long, so I'm going to kind of do a general synopsis of it, and then formulate my question, because it's not completely clear from the quote here. But this is the transcript from the episode. So basically, we're talking about first and foremost, it's children who play. Their way of being in the world is playful. They are born curious, and they wonder about the world. So the toddler sees something on the shelf on the other side of the room. It captures their interest, and they go on a quest to explore it, grab it, bite it, taste it, throw it, thus getting to know it. And then going on, it's like this exploratory approach will give them a very different experience of what it is rather than an adult which helpfully names it, or an adult is naming things. And the adult will say, oh, that's a carved wooden turtle. And instead, the toddler just goes and grabs this thing and, like you said, bites it, grabs it, tastes it, throws it. And that's how they experience what a carved wooden turtle is. And here, back to the quote, the wonder and multisensory knowledge of the toddler captures the nature of the object in higher fidelity than the quick naming of it. The naming of something makes an adult feel like they have grasped the thing in question, whilst naming something too soon gives us an impoverished understanding of it. Okay, so this is the quote, and this is something I've been stuck on recently. And I think this question I have for you is on two different layers. So as ever, if you'll allow me, I'm going to riff a little bit on the subject and just throw the whole mess over to you, and you can pick and choose what you want out of the whole ramble.
Right. Love your
basically,
riffs.
This goes back to the Good Point podcast with Rolf and Jeremy.
Yeah.
Rolf has that amazing quote that in order to talk about something, you first have to name it. So in that context, this idea of naming things is super important, actually. Like, yeah, we can't have a conversation about something unless we have a common language between us. And there is that utility then of communicating between people, obviously, to like we're doing right now. We're sharing ideas and we're jamming back and forth. And so this idea that like you have to name something, which means more that you have to kind of encapsulate and encode that information into some sort of words that you can use and share quickly and briefly. So we're not just constantly describing the thing over and over and over again. We just, a word is like a code. Like when we say tree, we don't have to say, leaves and branches and roots and bark and blah, 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 right? Like we can just say tree, and then it gets us going faster. And one thing I found in my juggling life is that there's been attempts to make juggling notation for years and years and years. And, this is going to go back like 30 years or more even, right? And for me, the point of a juggling notation is the same as the word tree. What you want to do is you want to encode a bunch of information down into shorter parts. And because a lot of juggling notation attempts have basically been ways to like replace language almost, like so basically like inventing another foreign language. The barrier to entry is very high on a lot of these new juggling notation systems. Basically you have to spend an equal amount of time learning the new system before it's usable. So it's like, instead of just saying, well, throw this ball here and catch it under your arm and then turn, which is like very verbose. The new juggling notation could be like A to B into C with a 5.1 to reverse.
Yeah.
Which is equally opaque, or it's not equally opaque. It's more opaque. It's equally verbose, but it's just more obtuse. Right. So like in that way, the notation system breaks down, and we should just use language. We should just use a common, like me and you, we share the English language to communicate. So, but for me, the whole point of a notation system of naming something is that you can hold more information in your mind together at the same time. And that's the value of a notation system, because then I can think about the word tree, and I can think about the word car, and I can think about the word Frodo. And all those things can be in my mind at the same time. Whereas if I have to describe every single one of those things, it's too much for my brain to hold all together. And this way of encoding information, then if I can hold it all in my mind at the same time, I can start to draw relationships between those blocks of knowledge of those things, right? So that's the value of naming something, I think. That's my first half, and I do the second half, and then I throw it to you.
Yeah.
So the second half is this idea exactly of the child or the baby, exploring the thing for what it actually is, rather than having the name and pose. some sort of like illusion of knowledge upon it. And so I'm really torn in my life right now between this idea of things that are kind of not open-ended, but things that aren't defined yet. Hey, Frodo, me and you, we're going to make a new performance company. Okay. That thing's not defined yet. Oh, what's the company about? Well, Frodo, it's whatever me and you want to make it about, right? It's open-ended. It's unexplored. It's undefined. It's not uncovered yet. But so there's that tension between, well, we need to talk about it.
Yeah.
But we can't name it yet because it's not defined. But at some point, those things have to coalesce and they have to become concrete. And so I really struggle with that right now in my life. There's been a few instances I've come upon recently, and me and you, we've talked about them privately a bunch of weeks ago. But this idea of having a project, for example, that's just kind of open-ended and undetermined in the moment of like, it could be anything. Hey, Frodo, let's do an act together. Oh, what could the act be? Well, it could be anything. And we're going to explore it and we're going to find out. But along that process of exploring and finding out, we have to start to lock parts of it down. We have to start to understand parts of it so that it becomes real. And you get into this in later episodes, actually, this exact problem. But yeah, so I find a really big tension between naming things too soon, like you say. Like if you name it too soon, then you think you understand it when actually you maybe don't because you haven't given it enough space and time to fully understand it. But at the same time, you have to name things to progress forwards. So I don't know. So there's a whole big mess of thoughts that I'm going to throw to you, and you can pick and choose if anything speaks to you. But how do you deal with any of this tension between naming things and exploring things and all of that?
I mean, so many wonderful things to grab a hold of in that. But the key thing to start sort of at the end first, it's that I think I used this language or the way to describe it in I don't know if it's in this episode or whatever, but it's to hold the names loosely or to hold the concepts loosely. And it goes back to this thing that I have been talking about for the last few years here, that reality or any object, anything is always potentially more than whatever way you have actualized it. The turtle that I have that's just standing on my shelf is just that. It's a turtle memory of a place I was when someone carved that thing or whatever. But for the toddler, it can be many more things. And to me, this is like the activity of what jugglers do and what I feel like the circus is doing. You step into the ring and you have just a hat and a cane, which people know. They know the use of those things. But then when you start twirling and flipping that hat and flipping and balancing that cane, you're immediately in a territory where you are redefining those things, the use of them. So the hat is now more than it was always those in potential, but in actuality, it was always just something that somebody wore, and particularly before JFK or whoever it was that was the first to not wear a hat, and it started a wave of people not wearing a hat. Before that, you couldn't not wear a hat, so everybody wore it, and it was one thing. It was something to have on your head, and so there it's like it's almost like our task as poets of motion or of whatever, it's to take the concepts of the familiar that you know and then open them up to be more than what they are. That's one aspect anyway of it. And for us to do that, it's to sit down when we are or when you are getting on the floor with a new object, whether it is a new thing you've created or you're exploring to use something in your juggling acts, that you are almost not almost you are deliberately being open-ended, looking at the different uses. You're taking up your balls again. You are now looking at what ways, what patterns can I do here that have not happened before. Where is it? So as you were talking about with Michael Motion the other day, you just mentioned he was like he's in the middle of doing an exploration, and all of a sudden a stick falls in a certain way, and one part of him goes, "Oh no," because that moment something happened with that stick where he just goes, this is a whole domain of exploration. There's a whole language here. And I just got a transmission from this thing straight into my mind, and I see it. To find everything about this will be a 5-year journey to master this and to make this possibility into actuality, in a sense. So that's like, so it is that you're going into your juggling creation, or in my creations, deliberately holding all ideas loosely. Don't want to nail them down too soon. Don't want to go, I want to have them open. And in fact, taking an idea that maybe starts out so that the audience think they know what's going on, and then they don't know it anymore, like, to get them into that territory. That is like, it's a key part of what I think circus, if you want to call what we do, call it that, or juggling or whatever. You step in, and it's in a sense what we did with Reflex. We started that thing with balls, clubs, and rings in a high-skilled, fast-paced, your take, of course, but within the context of your art and of Reflex, traditional juggling, throwing and catching. But at the end of that 6-7 minute act, the audience of general public would think, well, what is left now? And that's where you've taken them in and given them the thing that they expected to see in a juggling show, but you gave them all kind of in the first beginning, and they're just expecting one more routine of this, but you sort of give them all so that you could immediately enter into this thing where you hold the concept loosely and take them along with you through it. So, yeah.
So I think you resolved my kind of 2-part question already, and you've resolved that tension for me in your answer of, like, you hold those ideas loosely, you hold those concepts loosely, you hold the names loosely, so that you can move forward, grasping onto those concrete bits that you need to, but at the same time you're open to the possibility of them being something more. Okay, so this idea of holding onto something loosely, I think is wow, like, that's great, man. Like, that's perfect. But
yeah, just one thing, and it is that, and that goes for the act, so it goes for, I believe this is a fundamental feature of reality. Anything that we see out there is always more. Anything is always more, and this is what the territory that we're uncovering. It is the hat, it is the cane, but it is also potentially anything.
So you mentioned Michael Motion, and he has another quote which is directly related to this, and this is another layer of this question which I wanted to get into, so it's a perfect transition here. So the quote is, I want to not know for as long as possible what I'm doing, right? So he's doing something new, he's making a new piece, and he says, I want to not know for as long as possible. I want to stay in the mystery for as long as possible of what I'm doing. I don't want to narrow it down immediately. And I just want to ask you, as an artist speaking to another artist, as a creator speaking to you, who's you're a creator, right? So I was having a lot of conversations about this lately with Kyle Driggs, because we're making a new project together. And there's this talk about again, that's this beautiful harmony that you have in your life, Frodo, between this high concept and this very day-to-day practicality. Like, you kind of have both of those things in you, and you speak about those things a lot. And so I'm talking about this new project with Kyle, and we're just talking about something as simple as a rehearsal schedule, right? Like, it doesn't get more practical than a rehearsal schedule. Well, what date are you free? How long are we going to work? Etc. Like this. But then it gets into the conceptual realm of, I think for me, many times when I'm in a rehearsal process, for me, if I have to generalize, it's a narrowing down of possibilities. I see the arc of the process, and there's a deadline. And if we say we're going to make a show in 10 weeks, then in 10 weeks from now, we're going to have a show. And in order to have a show, we have to go from all the possibilities, which is the widest spectrum that we have, and we have to narrow it down to the show, which is the narrowest realm of possibilities that we have, right? So for me, oftentimes the creation process, I think about it as a narrowing down. But on the other hand, we have the artistic desire to be open to new experiences and open to the world of wonder and mystery. And it's the micromotion thing, where instead of a narrowing process, you have a widening process. So, and I think a lot of us navigate this kind of narrowing and widening in a more not such a black or white way. It's usually a little bit of both, right? So a lot of us, maybe we go into a rehearsal process and we start to widen our minds and we explore different possibilities for the first couple of weeks, right? But then there is at some point the narrowing down, and then we all have a different sort of rhythm on that. But I think, yes, I just want to know your experience of how do you think about, because I think my tendency to always narrow things down is good in the way that I make things real and concrete. That seems to be kind of a little trait I have, that sometimes people invite me into a group project solely because, oh, we'll get Jay in here because he'll kind of boil this down to like the real truth of like what we're going to actually do on stage. But on the other hand, I also feel as an artist that like I sometimes feel bad because I don't want to always be the bad guy who has to crash reality into your fantasy. Like I want to be that artist that just widens forever. You know, like I have that widening, you know, because then that's that romantic artistic dream or something. So how do you deal with this? And that comes into, the naming and the knowing and the exploring, right? So how do you widen and narrow, and how do you sit in mystery? Like, I don't get it.
Yeah. So I think what Michael Motion is talking about is John Keats's idea of negative capability. And when you introduced me to your friend, musician Brian, that was one of the first things that came up that I said, that Brian just fired on all cylinders. What's Brian's last name? I can't remember.
Brian Crabtree.
Crabtree, yeah. It makes incredible instruments and everything. And anyway, he loved that. And I love it too. Negative capability. It's to be able to be within unknowing without irritably grasp for facts and reason. I think that's the quote from Keats.
Wow.
Like you just get, because you, and his idea is that when we sit in the unknown, we get irritated and try to grab facts and reason and go, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do. Because I am also like you mentioned the other day, like, okay, well, we're doing this and we're talking highfalutin. And then I'm going, okay, well, how long is this going to last in the act? Because we only have 1 hour. And if this is the talk that you're going to do about this, it cannot be more than 2 minutes, which means we're down to roughly 200 words, which means that it is less than a page of text that we can afford ourselves here. So we can't act. So you got to constantly be there as well. And I think that comes from being a working performer, feeding my family with these things that I do. So I am driven to be practical and to make it happen. And I like to be within this negative capability. And with my writing, I write the whole season for that season 2 on this podcast of what showmanship is. And then I could take that and just tweak it, but I was unhappy with this. So I rewrite the whole thing. And it's like I rewrite and rewrite and rewrite and throw out and erase and rewrite, because it is never finished. And then you sort of go, I have to think of my writing also like these shows. At some point, you just have to put it out there and it will be flawed and it will be unfinished. And the idea, by the time I'm finished to go through the thing and start from the beginning, my thinking has evolved on some of these ideas. And I think, no, that's a bad way of expressing it anymore. So I don't like it. And then you got to rewrite it again. But the length of this being 300-400 pages, 350 pages, it takes so long to go through it each time to tweak it. And at some point, you just got to go, now we're doing the proofreading of it, even if the ideas already I'm not happy with them, because that is the way the shows are. Like we say, the show is always in a continuous change. So I would like to stay in the unknowing, and I preach that. Stay in it, hold the things loosely, and remember they can be something. But I think it is this, we have the two tendencies here on one side that goes concrete, make it, nail it down. Okay, we've already improvised that thing, so that's the end of that. We're just rehearsing it now. We're not in creation anymore. We're in rehearsal. And the other thing is, well, it could be anything else. Maybe we should just buy some more props and start exploring what it would mean to also have a standing lamp in this, or whatever. You're doing your juggling and you're going to have this, or a hat rack. What does this mean? And then you do, and then that, but that means there's like, okay, is that just one gag? Because we buy it for that. But when you explore that, there is everything else, the possibilities. So those are the things. And in the middle is the showman with these two tendencies on each side, pulling it to the concrete and narrowing it and naming it, if not too soon, then naming it concretely so that we can move on and start to perfect it. And the other, those are always tendencies, and going too far into either of those directions is not going to be beneficial. Because if you're only always open, you will not have anything to actually show when the clock strikes 9 and the curtain opens and you're about to do your thing, because it's all too wishy-washy. But if it's too concrete, you can get these things where you watch it and you feel like you're watching a painting by numbers act, where you go, oh yeah, I understand this. And this is the artist's way, or probably the human way, of like, you are actually at this, the in Norwegian it's called gylne middelvei. I don't know what that's called, like the golden mean. So like you're going in the, you will be swaying, and the pendulum will be swaying into one or the other. And when we talked about this the other day, in the process of remaking what is my like half hour, 40-minute corporate kind of act, because that's what it turns out that they want here. And I'm normally the guy that you call when you want something crazy. So my core acts are sword swallowing, spoon balance, spoon up the nose act, everything is funny, and then the tennis and the can balance. But that's too hardcore when you're performing for a bank at a little down here, or I'm performing for a taxi company or whatever. It's just too much of that. When I'm sparingly placed into a production of, like when I'm part of Mad Apple, or when I was part of Soiree, and I'm doing those crazy things in between. You have the sexy and the cool and the impressive in between, and then I come. So now I have to be those things. So I'm exploring a new act. Now I lost my thread in what I was going to say about that. But oh yeah, so, and then I think about what that act could be, because did a gig a couple of days ago, and it's all loose. And then the day comes, and now I need to actually tighten it, because now I'm doing it tonight.
Right.
And then I write and rewrite again. I have a book where I write all the scripts, and they're revolving, and I put the date at the top of it so that I have it, and it's the same title all the time. So in a way, it's like I rewrite a poem, or you rewrite your thing. I write it out again with a ballpoint pen on paper, and then as I write that out and going, okay, well, this is the new ideas, then there will be alterations and changes on that page. And then when I've sort of done with that, I go again, because this is my new draft, and then I go, okay, these are the new ideas, but they're all in footnotes and stars, and because I think, and then I rewrite it yet again. So maybe I have before each gig 3 of those things, and then that night I will do the third one, but maybe have other ideas as well, and then transcribe them next time.
That's a great point. So what you're saying, of course, is the reality, which is that it's not always just a narrowing or a widening to the end result. It's constantly, it's a narrowing down because you got a gig tonight. That's real. But then after that gig, you can use that feedback. It's a widening again, and then a narrowing again for the next gig. And so, yeah, that just reminds me of 3 little things from what you were saying now. And that's the second thing I was thinking, which is, in this idea of constantly wanting to keep things in mystery, there is that utility of drilling it down for tonight's show. You learn so much. Like, I think there's a danger in always just wanting things to be mysterious and like unknown, because you learn so much by actually concretizing in the moment part of it, right? And then you get that feedback loop. And that's what we're all about, is this feedback loop, actually.
Yeah.
Because in my first point, I feel bad generally as an artist that I'm not always like sitting in mystery. And it's what you said before. It's because we gotta pay our bills. We have to feed our families. And so I just feel like a hustler. Like, I've been hustling since I was a early teenager. And part of that hustle culture is I have to have a product. And my time is valuable towards that, especially, as a father, that we both have kids and you just don't have unlimited time to sit in mystery, and you just have to drill things down, and you have to have a product, you have to have a show that you can sell. And sometimes I feel like that damaged me in one way, that I can't get out of that spirit. And I wish sometimes I could be more chilled out and less product driven. That's maybe the wrong way, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And so the last point just to make about this idea of wanting to, my habit or my inclination to always want to narrow things down, is that as a juggler, at least, you already touched on this when you were speaking. There's a difference between narrowing down and being able to do it. So, so not only is it like I have a show next week, but I have to at some point stop widening my possibilities because I have to learn the technique. And that learning the technique, or learning your lines, or learning the blocking, or even just selecting the music, or getting the right costume.
Yeah.
It takes time. So it's not just like frivolous to be like, well, at this point we need to stop with the new ideas because we need to actualize. Even if we lock down the idea, okay, we're going to just only wear purple and we're going to have 10 fish and whatever, it takes time to make that real, And so as a juggler, I just wanted to put that in there, which you deal with with your own skills, that it takes time to learn skills. And I struggle with that so much in rehearsal, man, where I'll be in a creation for something new and I'll say, okay, at this point of the act, I should really juggle 5 rings, behind my back, turning in a circle upside down. That would be the thing to do. Or is it the thing to do? Because I could do it turning the other way, and I could do it with my other hand, and maybe in clubs instead of rings. And so for me, there's always that fight between having this widening of possibilities of imagining creativity and exploration, but that thing doesn't exist yet. And it takes me 6 months to learn that trick, or 2 years to learn that technique. And then I can only then do you actually see the reality of, like, you put it in the act at that point and you imagine, oh, I'm going to hit it on that music cue and the audience is going to go like this and the lights are going to go like this and it's going to be this thing. But, I always fight with that part of my creativity where I'm just thinking, not only do I have to balance the deadline of the widening and narrowing schedule in general, I have to balance the idea of hey, here's a new idea for a trick. Do I put the time in? Do I put 6 months into learning this trick? Because is it going to pay off? Is it going to work? And I find it pretty, like, we do these things organically, right? We've done it our whole lives since we were young. So it's not I don't stay up at night, I'm not sleeping over these things. But once we start uncovering what we're actually doing with our work and we're trying to, articulate the process, that's a pretty brutal part of the process for me. How do you navigate, like, you're making up a new trick and you say, oh man, I should really learn to balance this thing like this? And how do you know if you're going to put the time into it or not? Do you have some sort of way to process that?
It's like, it's an organic thing. And so much when I talk about these, this is when I talk about what an act is, or what showmanship is, what are the elements or whatever, and you can use it in these ways. The truth is usually that it comes out of a practical thing. I'm trying to name what it is and trying to find these domains, that it comes out of the practical stuff, so that I go, how can I divide these things up? So, and it's not like that I sat down and learned that first and then applied it. It's from looking at what is feels like it's endless possibilities, but then you go, there are patterns within all the possibilities. And so often it is just like, it really in many ways just comes down to something that I desire in that moment. Like I spent ages of throwing the hat up onto the cane. That was when you came here and we did that gig that time. That was one of the things I was rehearsing.
Yeah.
But I did it in performance because I was wearing a kind of hat that I could use for that. But I wear a tracksuit with that hat, So I can't do the disappearing cane in a good way, because I can't get rid of what needs to be getting rid of after you've disappeared the cane in a good way in that costume. And I now, in the costume where I can get rid of those, I don't wear that hat. Now I spent a considerable amount of time learning how to flip a hat up onto a stick balanced on my chin, and then pull the stick away and it fall onto my head. A classic old-fashioned, old-school gentleman juggling thing. And it was getting a good reaction. But now, due to a costume thing, like when you go on 5 fishes and a purple costume, that purple costume doesn't come with a hat then.
Right.
And now you can't do that trick because of it. So sometimes, but that skill will at some point maybe be polished again. Maybe it'll just be, and I have lots of those that I've practiced. And even more so often with magic, it has to do with buying things. So I'm buying decks of cards, blank on both sides, for a trick that I worked on with Charlie Caper that I was going to do in my show, imaginary magic show that I was going to do, and then never actually, that didn't concretize. But now I find another routine, which is Nick DeFat's incredible routine from one of his books. And those props that I bought for another thing, I can take them and reuse them. So that's buying stuff that you don't need, learning skills. It becomes part of your vocabulary that you can then use when you're creating in the future.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Nick there. So I was talking to Nick recently about his new show he's working on, and at one point he goes, "Yeah, I don't really know why I do this in the show. I mean, I really like it, but it doesn't fit because of this and this and this." And I said, "Hey, just to remember, you just said that you really liked it. So that's enough of a reason to do it. And this idea of, should I practice this trick or not? Is it going to pay off or not? It's what you already said, which is so worth remembering, which is why I want to bring it up again now, which is this idea that, oh, I just like to practice it. And of course, that's how we navigate most of these moments in our life. When you come to a routine and you say, oh, should I learn this trick or not? A large part of that conversation is also, well, I think I'll enjoy learning that trick, regardless of if I perform it in this routine or not. I mean, it is organic. It is more wrapped up than sort of like a pedantic, accounting, well, do I learn this or not? It's like, well, do I want to learn that thing? And this idea that doing something because you like it, it's so funny. I got that from Eric Oberry, because Eric's so good. You can go to Eric with the most philosophical, deep, long, wordy question, cathedral of thought. And then he'll just be like, well, you do that trick because you like to do it. Like, that's the answer. It's very dry and very succinct, and also very true and completely perfect, the perfect answer, right? So this idea of how do we navigate this tension between deadlines and widening and narrowing and our desires and our wishes and mystery and making money. And it's just like, at the end of the day, what do you like to do is not a bad way to kind of sum up that process that we navigate through our work.
Because what we are doing in our work and so is also our life. So and it is what we are adding to other people's life when we are entertaining them or interesting them, or if that's a word. If you're doing art, then maybe you aren't entertaining them. You're interested. You're giving them something. But for me, being an entertainer, that's why people book me. That I'm offering them moments of enjoyment, and my process should also have that enjoyment in it. And when I reread Nick's book for the third time, going like, okay, well, I'm really stuck. I'm in this mindset where I need something which is not hardcore. It's not sword swallowing or whatever. I need something that's hilarious and stupid. And then I find that act and I get so excited, and then start the process of making some of the props, and then realize, okay, these aren't quite what I thought the props that I had, but oh no, I have these other things came from the thing that I talked about with Charlie Caper, and then write it out, and I'm going, oh, now I have all the props and I'm so excited. I can't wait to do it. And a lot of that, what tells me that it's the right thing, is that I feel good about it. I'm excited to do it. And I mean, a big thing of it also came, it's a magic thing, and he has a description in his book of how to do a particular move with a deck of basically a deck of cards, but it's not actual cards. And I couldn't crack it the first time when I read through because I didn't have a deck of cards in my hands. And I just sort of went, oh, yeah, something. And then all of a sudden, when I actually read it and I had a deck of cards in my hands, that particular move, I was like, and it's going, oh, and then you just reverse this bit. And I'm like, what do you mean reverse? And I'm sitting there holding it. And all of a sudden, I have this flash of inspiration go, oh, I reverse it. Now these are the consequences, and all of a sudden I fall in love, and that's maybe from magic or from similar to juggling, where a technique comes in, and I fall in love with the technique as well. And I'm going, I am looking forward to the moment where I stand in front of an audience with just a bunch of cards and just with this ingenious little method, which apparently came from Chris Kenner or whatever. It just thrills me. So now I'm in love with this new idea on many levels.
Okay, so what you're talking about right now and what we both got into now in this last little bit of conversation is exactly the next quote I want to give you. And then it's a much more straightforward question for you. So literally what we were just saying is the beginning of this quote from the episode now. The quote is, but the benefits of play are to be found in a more systemic rather than linear thinking. So that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about systems and infrastructures, or like worlds that we're creating and networks and whatever, instead of a linear way of thinking. Okay, I learned this trick so I can do this act. It's like, well, I learned this skill and it might be applied in many different ways, or I buy this magic prop and I use it in 20 different tricks and blah, blah, blah. So a systemic way of play rather than linear thinking. Nature works by teaching us skills, by giving us drive to play, which manifests itself in curiosity. Again, what we were just saying, a desire to explore, to combine and recombine and ask what if, those are all things we just said. These desires will pay off in the future with a broad spectrum approach combined with our aptitude for metaphorical and symbolic thinking. And here's my question. Here's the last part of the quote. We can transfer our understanding of one thing to something else seemingly unrelated. And I know we were just giving a few really clear examples of that, but you have talked about that in other places and conversations with me in other contexts.
Yeah,
I think it's one of the most fascinating things I've heard you talk about in your work. It always inspires me whenever I hear you say it. I'm just going to read it one more time. We can transfer our understanding of one thing to something else seemingly unrelated. And I guess the question is, can you speak more deeply or more personally again about that sentence? Because in my mind, when I look at you and I hear and I get to talk to you, that feels like a really deeply entrenched core value of your work or your process somehow.
And me as a person, yeah,
and as a person. So can you just speak to that a little bit or give some comments of how you think about that?
Absolutely. It's something that I like. It got concretized at just about the time that pandemic started. I found the work of John Vervaeke, professor at the University of Toronto, and he had he put out a lecture series called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, which is a history of philosophy and of his thinking, and it's 50 university level lectures. In there, he talked about a book which, now that I'm put on the spot, it's called Metaphors We Live By. It's by Samuel and Johnson, and they make there in another book, even more densely philosophical, called Philosophy in the Flesh. They make an extended, deep argument that basically don't solidify this thinking in my mind. It's that metaphor is not something that you just see in poetry, that is something superfluous or mere time wasting. And for me, as soon as somebody goes, it's just this, it's mere this, then I'm immediately going, it's just circus, it's just entertainment, it's mere pastimes and fun and frivolousness. And I'm going, no, it is not. The fun and frivolousness joint is super important. And then these guys go that metaphors is the function of thinking itself. It's to be able to take something that you know from one domain and put it into another one. And this step of symbolic or metaphorical thinking, being able to hold two ideas, and the metaphor is, it's two things. It's like life and a river. And you go, life is a river. Similarly is if you say life is like a river, but metaphor is life is a river. And a life and river are not the same thing, but there's also many things that are the same. So to see those things who are the same to start with, and then see how other aspects might connect up to it, is how we learn something new. And then because then we learn stuff about rivers, and we learn stuff about life, or we learn stuff about and they claim then in their book or point out that this is the fundamental thing which thinking does. This is how we learn more about the world, is to take whatever we already understand, 1 and 1 equals 2, or whatever, and then apply that to other things. And then and all of this stuff. So they make that completely. And then they, in that book, and even more in Philosophy in the Flesh, they talk about how the initial metaphor where everything stems from is the body. We start from our physicality in space. So it places the original metaphor into what it means to be human in the body, but also then through the mind. So we go, we have put these problems behind us, but these problems aren't behind you in any way.
Right.
Some particular cultures, the future is in forwards, but some it's behind you. And they go into these kinds of things of how we place. So it's like, oh, the stock market is going up or going down, or
right.
or all. So, anyway. So those are the arguments, but it stems also from me, I think, as a young man being interested in the myths, the Norse myths in particular, Odin and Thor, mighty Thor, and all that stuff. So I spent a considerable amount of time when I was from when I was 17 till I was 18. I wrote this thing, and I wrote a massive document. It's a book that I bound in goatskin, and it did it properly. But I thought in there, and a question that I asked, that I worked on this for 1 year. It's a Waldorf school thing, Steiner school thing, and I asked the question, with the myths being as peculiar as they are, with human beings transforming themselves into a bird after having stolen the poetic mead, and then they fly out, and then it farts out these little droplets that goes around, which becomes all the shit poets everywhere. Or like I'm going like, how can something, because that myth of how poetry entered into the world or so is deeply fascinating, but it keeps also being stupid or silly, or Thor has to dress up like a lady, which back in those days was even more kind of funny or peculiar, that the toughest of the gods, would dress up as women. And my question was, how could my ancestors base their philosophical and general life needs on these stories that seem so strange? There is depth in here that was comforting and explanatory to them. And so that was the question. And in this, I believe during that year of what I read and carried on about to try to answer that, and the 3 different approaches that I took to kind of explain that, has colored me in the way that I think that you got to hold the idea loosely, because there are similarities between these 2 things. And from what I also find is that comes out in my writing through these episodes, where sometimes I make up something in the moment, and I force myself to make it up to prove the process or whatever. And then as I start it, I go, yeah, that goes really deep, this metaphor or whatever. So I sometimes have this feeling that you can take any 2 things and place them up against each other, and there will be something of value in it. But the danger of this as well, you want to concretize it and you want to hold things loosely, but before you know it, you're in conspiracy theory territory, or the world is flat, or whatever. Like, and you go and you draw all these interesting parallels, and so you can, of course, go off and you can go. There are ways where you go. It makes sense to think of a geocentric universe where the Earth is the center of the universe. There are, like, because that is what it looks like to us. So it makes valuable. It can be a valuable contribution, but it's not an ultimate fact or whatever. Anyway, so yeah, so those are like how that came into it. This was maybe not quite what you asked for, but that's how that's what the ideas are and how they came into my life, and that it's such a big part of me.
No, that's exactly what I asked for. That was perfect. Because you've spoken about that in the past, and I think you gave a really good context for that, at least for
where
me.
it comes from.
Yeah,
but
well,
yeah, it's.
No, I got one last.
Just one thing to comment on what's going on now, because we're talking a lot about holding ideas loosely and everything, and to connect it back into episode 107 and 109. What the project is in episode 107 and 109 is to explain what play is, and the way that I have done it by dividing it up into these 5 different categories, or the different aspects of it. The way I have done that is to be able to hold play loosely and to see it, to catch as many things as possible. I'm not saying everything is play, because if you do that, then nothing makes sense, because now everything is that again. So, but I want to, so in a sense, this idea of holding things loosely and not name them too soon, or as I have used the metaphor in here, is to nail the butterfly, or to pin the butterfly, to look at it. You lose the most salient feature of it, that it flies around and drinks nectar, but you get a lot of other detail in it. So in a sense, what we're talking about now is relevant, even though we're not talking specifically about what it is. Like, it'll be in the next episode, but there we talk about rules. Because you were talking about how you concretize things, and people call Jay Gilligan, because if you're making a juggling show, which has a tendency to, or can easily go into just a whole bunch of shapes of people juggling this skill, and you concretize it. That's what this for. And I can't remember what I call these. Do I call them categories, or do I call them the 4 aspects of play, or whatever? So rule number 4 is that play has rules. And it seems like that's stringent, but it's the rules of the game that makes it into what it is. And it's the constrictions that you place on whoever it is that you're helping. Well, we constrict it to this and we constrict it to that. And we need to be ready by then, because that's when those rules that you create, set up, those are the ones that actually create and make that act into what it is.
Yeah.
So this is just to kind of show that although we aren't speaking specifically about that, it's the aspect number 3 here is that it is self-motivated, and that it's a voluntary thing that we do. Play is.
Yeah.
And we just spoke. Why do I learn the new trick? Well, it's because I want to.
Yeah.
I have this pull towards it, and all of a sudden the things align, and balloons and animals and cards, all in Nick's routine, speaks to me, and then this enthusiasm comes from within me, where I start to want to do it. And that's why I can then go for hours and hours and spend money and do all those things where everything stops mattering, because this thing is now the most important thing. But it is just balloon animals, pieces of card that I write on with a pen. But in my mind now, this is this is play. Aspect number 3, as described in episode 107, it's self-motivated, and it's something voluntary. You do it because of an inner motivation. So, and number 1, the first of these things are that it is fun and that you don't want it to end. And that comes from, that's similar to self-motivation. It's the aspect of the self-motivation that drives you on, because I'm actually getting pleasure in one way or another. I'm getting pleasure for pursuing these things. I'm getting pleasure for standing and practicing the moves that I have to do with the cards. I'm getting pleasure of thinking of, and then I turn the music on then, and then I do this with all those aspects of it. I find them fun to think about and to actually stand up and practice. So this is just to show that what we are doing here now is playful, and while episode 107 and 109 has 5 aspects of play, it's to hold it loosely, like what we're talking about. So if it feels like I'm drifting off or on something, it's like we are now using all of these things that we talk about. So that was just a little.
No, that's great. That's a super good summary of for 107. I mean, where we're at right now. So I'm gonna throw one last quote to you from the episode, which is completely not related to anything that we've been talking about. So
that's great, and we'll keep it concise, and we'll.
That was a good summary. We'll do this last random thought because it's really a side street, but I really want to hear if you have some opinion, or like if you could elaborate on this a little bit, because again, you didn't talk about it very deeply in the episode because you just touched upon it because you're going somewhere else with your train of thought, and I really appreciate that. But I couldn't skip over this because it really caught my attention, and it's really fun, and you'll see why when I say it. So the quote from the transcript, it was this: "They all seem in one way or another to say, now that school is done, it's time for you to do exactly what you've always wanted to do. And it seems so obvious and easy, but I'm not sure that after a decade and a half of schooling and just following the rules of others, where some answers are right and others are wrong, that you are so well equipped to know what you want. And by the time that you're 20 years old, it's too late to start looking." So I'm just gonna give a little bit of context around why I pulled this quote out, and then see what you have to say about it, and then we can wrap up 107. So basically, obviously, this interested me because I've been teaching in the circus school in Sweden for whatever 20 or 25 years or whatever, and I love this idea that this whole thing of like, okay, now we taught you all the facts and you've gone through the whole program, and now do whatever you want. And I love that, because you're completely right. This idea of what do I want? We very rarely, even outside of school in our adult lives or at any point in life, we very rarely talk about how do we know what we want. We very rarely talk about the process of figuring out what do I like and what do I not like. We very rarely talk about the process of how we learn how to make choices. And is that even a thing that you can curate and get better at? And this is exactly what I talk about in the juggling program with my work in the circus school in Sweden. It's what I talk about all the time is this idea of consciousness, that we're going from intuitive thinking to conscious thinking, which means you're making choices on purpose instead of on accident or without even realizing you're making a choice. And we're curating a sense of taste and style and that's not in a certain direction. That's just your personal taste, your personal style. Who are you and who do you want to be? And I talk about this all the time, that in the same way we practice technique, you practice throwing a hat on top of a cane that you've balanced on your head. I practice throwing 7 clubs so I don't drop them on the floor, whatever. And in those ways, we talk about technique, and it's so straightforward. No one takes for granted, oh yeah, the first time you try to throw that hat up onto the cane, it's going to miss. Nobody thinks that's weird. But it's so strange that we also don't approach creativity in that same sort of basic way of working in terms of making choices. You can also practice making choices. Guess what? The first time you make a choice, if you've never done it before, it's probably not going to be the good choice or a good choice, or it's probably not going to be a very straightforward process. You might stress out about that choice for freaking months or years. I don't know, right? Because you're not used to making choices. And so one thing I encourage, and one thing we work on in the program with the juggling, is making, like, how do you practice making choices? And part of that is literally just making it's the same thing as everything else that you want to learn in a physical way. You learn things through repetition. You throw that hat up into the stick a million times, and at some point it starts to go on the stick. And it's the same thing with making choices. You just you can set yourself a limit of an hour or 2 hours a day, and you just make choices as fast as you can. It sounds so stupid, but I don't know. It's one of these ideas where I was thinking for juggling, why is it in a circus school? A lot of the other circus disciplines, you need physical infrastructure to prevent injuries. For example, if you're going to do teeterboard in your backyard with no crash mat and no lunge lines and no coach, you might like fall and break your neck if you're trying to do that on your own. Whereas with juggling, you can throw that hat up onto the stick and you're not going to break your neck. Like you can learn that on your own. So why would we have juggling in a circus school? And one of the criteria of a few different ones, but one of them was this idea of efficiency. So if you go to circus school for juggling, your process might be more efficient than a juggler who didn't go to circus school. And then efficiency means that we get to conserve our resources, our time, money, energy, passion, and things like this, our strength and whatever. And so part of this idea of efficiency then is making choices, like making choices in an efficient manner. That doesn't mean you frivolously don't think about choices and just throw them away, but it means you make them in an efficient way. So you put the most minimum amount of effort and energy into making these choices effortlessly, and then that's a more efficient process. And so I love this tension you have here between following the rules and doing what everyone says for all of your school years. And then at the end of the school years, they go, well, do whatever you want. And you're just like, how do I know what I want to do? Like it's amazing, that little quote that you have there. So what relationship do you have to that kind of those thoughts, I guess?
I think one of the key things by introducing play here and having what's the third of these aspects, which is that it is self-motivated. You are so used to, through your schooling, of it not being self-motivated. Even when you really start to like a subject, mathematics or history, then 1 hour later, you have to get into something else. So even if you get into a flow, after a while, you learn that you don't even want to apply yourself and go crazy, because all of a sudden you got to do something you don't like, or you got to go out and have recess, or you got to go whatever. So you lose this ability to just follow your own desires, your own inclinations, and your own drives. And I think that's the danger of when we take away free play, and when kids go to school younger and younger. School used to start when you were 7, and now it starts at 6, and in England starts at 4, and they start to look at reading, and it takes 3 years for them to learn to read, but around 7 they start to get it. But I also got it at 7 when I started. Didn't need those 3 years beforehand where I was practicing to sit behind a desk, because I know I couldn't sit at the desk by the time I was 10. That was one of the issues I had. But through playing, through play, which I believe is the most healthy and original state that a human being needs to adapt, and being in a playful state is to playfully remain within the own negative capabilities, not grasping for fact and reason, yet also actualizing things by actually doing them. I'm making rules and following them. So when you're speaking now, I was just struck by how much I can immediately, when you say those things, like making choices. Yeah, you got to make choices. That's, in a way, you're forming rules. How do you make those rules? It's actually self-motivated. What are you guided that by, which is rule number 3, aspect number 1. Like, and how do you decide? Why did you want to do that? Because you decided it, and go, why did you do it? Because it's fun, or because I like it, or because it's pretty, or it makes me feel sexy, or whatever it is that it does. And then that these aspects come into everything. So I see with having the language of play in my mind, with these, what we're talking about in episode 7 on 107, 109, that I see it all come together. And it's what's being taken away is that we forget to, or don't learn to listen to this inner motivation and listen to your own desires, because you get confused along the way by, you need to make money, you need to be able to have a career, you need to be able to do this, and along the way those are the practical things that are on the outside. Yet you might then spend your whole life in a job that makes a lot of sense on paper, but it's not your passion. And then you start to do something else for your work than what you do for your life or your enjoyment. So you're looking forward to the weekend because then you can do this.
Right.
But if there's any loophole that you and me have nailed, it's that what I do on the weekend, my in quotes weekend, because that could be a Tuesday and a Wednesday, it's that I do my work, what other people call their work. But that's when I'm doing play, when I'm reading Nick's book and I'm laughing out loud and I'm sending him a message. And when I go, so I have made my work into play, or I am playing when I'm working, so that what I do when I have free time, it's to do the thing that I'm passionate about. And to boil that down to what you have said, it's that it is making those choices. That's the language that you've used for as long as I've known you. It's like you're just teaching people to make that choice. But people get choice paralyzation, because any choice that you take, it's so difficult. And I get it. I don't like to go to clothes stores and all this sort of I have my issues, but they're not within taking creative decisions as to what on stage, because that I have practiced. It's the only thing that I've heard. It's the where I have my 10,000 hours. So when I think of an idea, I can often immediately know whether this is going to be funny. It might not be my next tennis racket act that people book me for, whatever, but maybe it will be. And so because it is funny and has value, and I know that. So so I think you're using beautiful language in here, and I hope that the people that go to your classes at the school see that what you're teaching them is not you do it like this, you do it like that, but that you take it out of the schooling system where there was a right and a wrong. And you are teaching through the 3 years at the Stockholm school, in your encounters with them, you're teaching them to find that inner motivation, to listen to their own choices, and not just to listen to them, but to be conscious that this is my desire, this is my choice, and it is valid. Why? Because I enjoy it, because it comes from me, and because I enjoy the imaginative, improvisational thing. I'm just using the language from the different aspects, but I think
that's perfect.
You're teaching them to listen to themselves again.
Great. Yeah, great, man. Yeah, that's a perfect way to say it. Well, hey, thanks for that. So that's all my notes on 107, and we'll do 109 next.
Looking forward to it. What a pleasure. Have an excellent one.
See you, man.
All right, my friend. And we have come to the end of another episode. And as skilled as I am, I have just remembered that I should tell you to do something. And if you want to support the podcast, just click subscribe. It is noticed by the algorithms if I have a lot of subscribers to the podcast. It's free, but it's very good for me. So please click subscribe. And then until next time, take care of yourself, those you love, and I hope to see you along the way.